Hello, and welcome to Group 44's final presentation. Today, we will be discussing youth in baseball and specifically the exploitation of Latin American players, as well as our proposal to form a solution to these issues.
Latin American players play a significant role in contemporary MLB matches. As of opening day 2023, Latino players made up just over 30% of Major League Baseball rosters. MLB spends hundreds of millions each year on Latin American prospects, often signing boys as young as 16 with virtually no legal protections. This free agent loophole fuels youth camp run by unregulated agents, where poor kids give up school and risk abuse in hopes of a big bonus. Our presentation will argue for an international labor resolution that levels the playing field and safeguards these youth athletes.
Now for our argument. As Major League Baseball, also known as the MLB, continues to use international players, such as those from Latin America, they must also set and create an international labor agreement, one that sets a standard recruitment age regardless of citizenship or origin and creates restriction on exploitive scouting for countries other than the US. This is to address the ethical concerns surrounding the MLB and their use of recruiting talented youth from overseas. Not only that, but to also ensure protection for these players from negative stereotypes. Given this, we will highlight the malpractice done by the MLB and their impacts on Latin America through our presentation.
Yeah, so basically the entire idea works behind the fact that Latino players as young as 12 are promised a potential career in the big leagues, and they're sold this promise and forced to endure years of arduous training and hurdles, and basically with no guarantee of them making it. And this promise is made to hundreds of players, right? So this entire system that is meant to recruit players, it's not really a system built to nurture athletes. It's more of a Darwinist machine trying to churn out athletes with no actual concern for each individual player. And I guess that's made even more clear in how they treat them financially, with budget constraints limiting what they are actually able to spend on for each player. It is very clear that the MLB does not actually have any financial interest in nurturing talent. They're trying to get as many people pushed into the big leagues as possible, and it's basically a numbers game for them.
Under the MLB draft, any player who's a U.S. resident from the U.S. territory must wait until age 18, either from high school graduation or after junior year of college, to enter professional baseball. This gives U.S. prospects clear protections. They finish high school and enter the regular draft with union representation and minimum salary structure. However, there is no equivalent MLB role for Latin American teams. They can sign international people at age 16 with no draft, no union oversight, and local countries like Dominican and Venezuela are often permitted working at young ages. So many 16-year-olds enter the system without consistent protections. This gap creates like a loophole we've been discussing, signing younger players overseas with few safeguards for their education, health, and their rights.
Let's take a closer look at youth camps, particularly baseball academies. While these are often marketed as elite training facilities, the reality is for many young players far less glamorous. Living conditions can be overcrowded with minimal resources and a singular focus on athletic performance. Education and personal development often take a backseat. For every Latin player who signs with a major league team, hundreds are cut. These are kids who are from the age of 12 or 13, leave behind school to train full-time in pursuit of one dream, becoming a professional baseball player. In the process, they often sacrifice their education, their physical and mental health, and their time with their families. When they're eventually cut, the common outcome, given the staggering odds, is they not just lose job opportunities, they also go home without a diploma, without job skills, and often with chronic injuries and trauma from years of overtraining. And perhaps the most damaging of all, they return with the stigma of failure in their communities where baseball is seen as the only ticket out. This stands as a sharp contrast from the experience of many US-born players who have a far more supportive system, where they have a structured high school and collegiate programs that emphasize not only athletic training, but also academic achievement, nutrition, and mental health.
So Latin American players are frequently stereotyped in baseball. Two of the adjectives that are commonly used to describe them are fiery and flashy. So it kind of becomes this two sides of a coin situation where you have these players that are so passionate and care greatly about the game, but can also be seen as erratic and somewhat wild in a sport where traditionally you're supposed to kind of keep your emotions in check. Additionally, many of them are viewed as poor leaders due to, that alleged instability, as well as the inability to speak English in a sport that seems so inherently American. So they can't really be seen as team leaders by a lot of American people because of those reasons. But Latin American players are also typically seen as these athletic freaks that can kind of move faster in the field and throw and hit harder than any other players. So that kind of sets up this hypocritical image of Latino players that paints them as extremely valuable physically, but emotionally unstable and somewhat disposable to the rest of the league.
So here comes the question. Why is this so conflicting? Here's 4 reasons. The first one is ethical double standards. Latin American prospects are trained in win at all costs systems with minimal focus on education. Like we mentioned in the youth camps, those kids have to drop out from high school or even at a younger age, while US players often benefit from college level coaching, nutrition, and academics. MLB claims to support player development, but only offers it fully to those with legal protections. The second reason is global human experimentation. MLB uses Latin America as a testing ground for raw athleticism with minimum regard for long-term outcomes. For example, those kids cannot live outside of the baseball, basically. Youth athletes are reduced to physical commodities, a practice that would be unacceptable if done to US youth. The third reason is invisible loss. For every Latin player who signs, hundreds are cut after sacrificing education, health, and family life. These players often return home worse off, now stigmatized and lacking skills to re-enter school or work. Those players who got cut off gave up their education at a very young age. In most cases, the only thing those players know is playing baseball. They do not have other means for living. The last reason is asymmetrical globalization. Latin youth face high risk for low reward, while MLB reaps financial gain. For example, Latino players earn approximately 6.8 million per win above replacement, which is about 12% less than Black and white players. Without global standards, opportunity becomes a euphemism for institutionalized exploitation.
To further emphasize our argument, here's a clip that highlights the exploitive behavior of the MLB.
There are 4 guiding principles to the Dominican Republic: God, country, liberty, and baseball. For decades, the MLB has used the Dominican Republic as a pipeline for baseball talent, encouraging young boys to drop their education in pursuit of a near impossible dream. All 30 MLB clubs have had their own training complexes on the island since 2003, which has helped counteract the exploitation and mishandling of Dominican talent by independent camps and recruiters. However, out of 100 young Dominican players who get picked to play in these MLB camps, only an average of 2 or 3 actually make it to a major league team, leaving many of the kids who get cut with limited career options. It's no secret that the chances of making it are pretty slim here, but we wanted to know what choices these kids have now after the big league dream ends.
Now we're going to talk about ball player Pelotero. It's a 2011 documentary that follows 2 Dominican teens, and it's a case study into how they were sold this promise of a baseball career and all the things that endure, basically like age verification, the intense pressure that comes from potential failure, the lack of regulation, shoddy conditions. And I think this is a really good case study into what these players actually endure because it shows how they're promised an MLB career, but the reality is that they had to face so many hurdles to actually get where they are today. And it shows how the system is really built to churn out athletes with no concern for the kids themselves. But that is only like the surface level view. That's what we see directly because, as we established earlier, for every teen who makes it, there are hundreds who are left behind. And I think this is a great example of how this is not fair to all these kids who are being left behind with nothing to show for it. And they have to endure the same conditions that these guys had to. And that is really just unfair to all of them.
US and Puerto Rican kids can't sign pro ball until they're 18 and go through the draft, but Latin American teens can ink a deal at 16, sometimes even younger, and that 2 year head start creates like a mad dash. Teams and Biscones hunt down 13 and 14-year-olds, often putting them out of school and leaving them with zero protection.
One of the most troubling things about the Latin America to MLB pipeline is these unregulated Buscon camps. There's over 1,000 independent trainers known as Buscons that operate in the region, often targeting boys as young as like 12 or 13. These trainers promise a path to professional baseball, but it often comes at a really steep cost. These families are driven by hope and often, facing poverty, and they allow their children to leave school, commit full time to baseball, and like makeshift unlicensed academies. And these camps are typically out of oversight from any governing body or regulations, meaning there's no health standards, no education requirements, and no protections at all for the kids involved. In these environments, players have significant health risks, including intense training, poor nutrition, no medical care, and if they're injured, they're cut. And if they don't attract scouts, they're cut with no support or really any backup plan. And even when a player does succeed and sign a contract, the system continues to exploit them because the Buscons can take up to 30% of the player's signing bonus. So after years of sacrificing education, risking their bodies, and investing their entire youth into this dream, a third of the reward is handed over to the person who put them there in the first place.
And so tying into that exploitative system, another issue with the stereotyping of Latino players is the tremendous pressure it puts on them, both racially and financially. And essentially, due to these players, their perceived image of being, physically gifted, but somewhat undisciplined and overly emotional, many teams are able to justify their motives for treating these prospects as essentially cheap labor and simply moving off them at the slightest inconvenience when maybe they wouldn't have done so for a white player. And these double standards force Latinos to essentially suppress their emotions if they want to stay in the league and prevent a lot of Latino players who have the skills to make an MLB team from doing so simply because of these character issues, which is really just an idea that's been perpetuated through the stereotyping of Latinos.
Although MLB is undergoing globalization, no international draft or labor standards, MLB billion-dollar Caribbean pipeline runs on local loopholes, while young players bear the human costs, such as giving up their education and suffering from inadequate resources and foods.
As you can see, the MLB is a prime example of exploiting unregulated labor laws found throughout Latin America. This has led to poor recruitment processes that often involve underage signings, unregulated camps, and unequal protections. We hope that one day the MLB can set an international labor standard, one with a uniform age requirement and basic protections such as a right to education, licensed agents, and health protections. This way, the MLB is held accountable to its moral standards that ensures every prospect is treated fairly, both in baseball and out of it. With this, adopting a global oversight can not only protect baseball's integrity, but also protect talented young players from exploitation. Now, thank you so much. This was Group 44's project. Here are our references, and have a great day.